Today I'm making some homemade breadsticks. Now for the homemade breadsticks, you can use pizza dough from your local pizzeria place. We have a great one down the street. Or you can use it from the store, or you can make your own. And today I'm going to show you how easy it is to make your own. Now I'm using bread flour because it has a higher protein content, which means more chew. And you can weigh or measure the ingredients. I find weighing baking ingredients a little bit easier, especially if the ingredients are a little on the unusual side in terms of amounts. I'm going to tear the scale. We're going to start with 1 1/3 cups bread flour, which will measure about 7 1/3 ounces. 7, 1/4, and a little. There we go, 3/8, perfect. All right, next we're going to add some semolina flour. Now, if you don't have this in your pantry, it holds for a long time, and once you start making this dough, you're going to run through all the semolina. It adds a wonderful nutty flavor and some good texture. So to this, we're going to add 1/2 cup of semolina, or 3 ounces. Tear it again. 7/8, oh, just a little bit more. 3 ounces. Last but not least, we're going to add some instant yeast, and you definitely want to use instant yeast or rapid rise yeast here because you don't need to proof it ahead of time. You can just add it right in with the dry ingredients. We're going to add a whopping 2 teaspoons of yeast. Now, I always have yeast. I buy it in bulk and I keep it in the refrigerator in a big glass bowl like this. But if you have the packets, 1 packet is a little more than 2 teaspoons. A packet is generally about 2 1/4 teaspoons. So 1 packet will yield enough for this dough. Last but not least, we're going to add a little bit of sugar to the dough. Add sweetness also. It's good food for the yeast. We're just going to add 2 teaspoons of sugar. So we're going to make this dough in the food processor. It's an easy way to knead the dough and pull it together. And there's really no need to pull out a plastic dough blade. The metal blade actually works just as well, if not a little better. So with the metal blade, we're going to add all these dry ingredients. I'm just going to give it a whiz for about a second or two just to combine those. All right, so now we're going to put together the wet ingredients for the dough. We're going to use warm water. Now this water measures about 115 degrees, thereabouts. You don't want to go over 120, but you want it to be over 110. Yeah, 111, perfect. That warm water is crucial for activating that yeast and making this a quick rising dough. Now this recipe uses a 1/2 cup of water plus 2 tablespoons, which is kind of annoying to measure if you're using liquid measuring cups. So instead I'm going to weigh it on a scale because it's just 5 ounces. Perfect. Next is the secret ingredient. It is beer. And not just any kind of beer. You want a light beer, a lager, because it is a mild flavor. It's weedy. It has that fermented flavor that you want in the dough. You don't want to use a dark beer. I call beers like this, I call them lawnmower beers because they taste really good after you've mowed the lawn in the summer and it's ice cold. So you want a lawnmower beer for this. You only want about 1/4 cup. All right, so we're going to add that right to the water because we're going to add all the liquids at the same time. Next up, we're going to add some olive oil for flavor and dough flexibility. You don't need a lot of olive oil, just 1.5 teaspoons. Teaspoon. I know I'm using the teaspoon measure to measure 1/2 teaspoon. Crazy. All right, I'm going wild. So you want to add some vinegar, which adds not only a good flavor, but it acts a little bit as a dough conditioner. You just want distilled white vinegar here, and I happen to have a huge jug of it because, well, I have a 12-year-old and we like to make volcanoes. And of course, this is the vinegar of choice for volcanoes. All right, so we only need 2 teaspoons of vinegar. So 1, 2. So now back in the food processor, we're going to take the feed tube out, and I'm going to pour the liquid through the feed tube while the processor is running. It's going to form a quick dough. So we're going to let this dough rest for 10 minutes, and that resting time has a name. It's called auto lease. I know, it sounds like you're leasing an auto, but really it's for resting dough. And what happens is the flour hydrates with the moisture that helps build gluten, and the yeast gets time to activate. Now we haven't added the salt because the salt impedes both of those things. So we're going to add the salt after the 10-minute rest. That dough has rested for 10 minutes, and it's time to add the salt. We're adding 2 teaspoons of table salt. We're going to add the salt right to the food processor, and now we're just going to buzz this together again until it breaks up and forms a nice satiny ball. That is perfect. Going to dump this out onto a floured work surface, You're just gonna knead it a couple times, about 10 seconds. Really bring it together. And this is where this dough really pays off. The dough's nice and warm, it's easy to use. And we're gonna shape it right away. In fact, if you were gonna make pizza with this dough, and then pizza with this is fabulous, you could shape it right away into pizza rounds and be ready to go. To shape this for breadsticks, I'm gonna cut the dough in half. And here I have a rimmed baking sheet lined with parchment, and I sprayed the parchment with vegetable oil spray so that it's nice and slick. That way the dough won't stick. Now I'm gonna just stretch this dough, and I'm gonna make rectangles, or loose rustic rectangles. And it's about the width of the baking sheet and about 5 or 6 inches wide. And it's a combination of using your hands like this and stretching it. I found the dough will start to snap back, so if you get it into this rough shape to start, then you can move on to the second one, and you can go back to the first one. It gives that first one time to relax so you can finish shaping it later. Let gravity help you here. I like greasing my hands for this rather than flouring it because it just works better. Most important is not the shape, because we're going to cut them into breadsticks, but that they're the same thickness so that it bakes through at the same rate. So worry less about the shape and more about the thickness. Now the key to this recipe is letting this sit like this for 30 minutes. That's the only rising time we're going to get out of this dough. So to let it rise, we're going to take some plastic wrap. I'm going to grease it down, that way the dough won't stick to the plastic wrap, obviously. So that's it for making this dough. I'm going to set it aside for about 30 minutes till it gets a little puffy. And then when we come back, I'll toss it with some fresh herbs and we can put it in the oven. This dough has been resting for 30 minutes, and you can see it's relaxed a bunch, it's gotten puffy, and it's ready to top and bake. So I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to put together a simple topping for these breadsticks. Now you can do anything. You can just do olive oil and salt, you can do butter and salt, or you could do some fresh herbs like I have here. And this is fresh thyme. I'm just going to mince about 2 teaspoons of fresh thyme. This has been washed already, obviously. Thyme is one of the easiest herbs to pick. What you do is you hold a stem out and then you run your fingers backwards and all the leaves come off. And then the very top, you kind of just pull that top off. Ooh, this stuff is strong, it smells good. Again, you're looking for about 2 teaspoons minced. So I'm just gonna go back through and get any woody pieces that might have fallen through. Again, the very tips are fine. All right, give it a quick mince. All right, that's good. Put this in a bowl. We're gonna combine it with some dried oregano. Now, if you have fresh oregano, that tastes great here too. For whatever reason, I usually have fresh thyme around because I throw thyme into absolutely everything I cook, from soups and stocks to stews. I put some in my breakfast hash, you name it, thyme goes everywhere. It's almost like salt and pepper and thyme are like the standard seasonings in my house. But oregano, dried works well here. We're gonna add 2 teaspoons of dried oregano. Now this next ingredient, some of you might not approve, it's garlic powder. I love garlic powder, especially in an application like this where we're gonna mix it with some fat. In this case, we're gonna use butter, and it really blooms in its flavor, and I love how it tastes on breadsticks. It's kind of old school flavor on breadsticks. So that's a teaspoon of garlic powder, a little bit of salt, half a teaspoon of salt. This is kosher salt. Now again, if you're using table salt, always remember that kosher salt is roughly twice this size as table. So always use half the amount when using table salt to kosher salt. And last but not least, some black pepper. Now we're just gonna mix this up. Oh yeah. Oh, smells like breadsticks. Okay, now we're gonna add just a little bit of butter. All right, so it's about 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. We're just gonna brush it on the top, about 1.5 tablespoons on the top side, because we're gonna season both sides of this dough. That is the key to making these breadsticks really have flavor all the way through. And we're gonna sprinkle it with half of these herbs. I'm gonna flip the dough over. Ooh. You can see how relaxed that dough is. It just wants to stretch out, which is awesome. So this is the time that you can reshape your dough and make any parts of the dough that were a little thinner than the other parts. This is when you can readjust and make it all the same thickness. There's a little thin right there. Sometimes I like the thin parts, especially when they make those bubbles. Those are the ones that wind up on my plate. Remaining butter here. And rest of these herbs. One more step before these are ready for the oven, which is cutting them into breadsticks, which I found way easier to do before you put in the oven rather than after. So using a bench scraper or a knife, I'm just gonna measure out 1-inch breadsticks. Again, rustic is the name of the game here. Oh, I like this big one on the end as it is. Someone's getting a nice fat one on the end. All right, so into a ripping hot oven, 450 degrees. These only take about 10 minutes to bake. But because it's such a short oven time and it's so high, definitely make sure you rotate them halfway through baking so they brown evenly. It's been 10 minutes, so those breadsticks should be done. Oh, look at that, nice and golden browned. Of course, I spun that pan around halfway through so they're evenly browned. Oh, you should smell these. I'm just gonna set these aside to cool. All right, now for the breadsticks. Simply take the breadsticks and you can tear them apart. Oh yeah, and just put them on the side like that. And that's it. And those breadsticks, because I made my own dough with the bread flour, they have a really good chew. Well, that's it. I'm just gonna gather everybody. We're gonna take our plates and eat outside because it's such a gorgeous day. Ziggy, go ring the dinner bell. Thanks for watching. What'd you think? Leave a comment below and let me know what you're excited to cook this week. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. You can get today's recipes and more for free at our website, americastestkitchen.com/JuliaAtHome.